All right. Okay. Brian, you ever see kids? You ever see kids who just like, as soon as they see you signing, they think if they just do this, that you're going to.
Yeah, I'll make sense of it. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have to say, watch your mouth. Okay, Brian, introduce yourself. Now, use your voice too.
Well, it's interesting because my computer video is slower than what I'm actually talking. My name is Brian Smith. I'm a sign language interpreter. I live in the outside the Philadelphia area. And I've been interpreting for about 25 years, 24, 25. That's me. I can say more. I can go on. I'm an interpreter. That's it. Okay. So I guess I could talk a little about interpreting, and if you have questions, just literally raise your hand. You don't have to use the feature on the computer, but I work in many different settings, from hospital, doctor's offices, schools. I worked in school at K-12 and a high school for 18 years. Well, high school for 13 years, 3 years elementary, and then middle school is mixed in there a little bit. I interpret after school sports for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. So I've interpreted mostly all sports except water polo and girls basketball. Girls teams are I don't like interpreting for girls teams because they're catty and their little fights can go on for the whole season, whereas guys just take care of it and it's done. I'm seeing my screen, my phone screen is at 20%. So I'm gonna have to get my charger here in a minute. But so I've done that. Job interviews, work trainings on people who are first hired. So I know about UPS, and I've worked at UPS a lot for trainings. Or else some fun stuff. All over. Like I think a couple of the most interesting times where I worked at a drug testing lab, so I had to see the specimens, and people think they're going to pass the drug test because they put something in their their specimen, and you're like, and no, it just comes green. You see it come across, and it's like totally green. What else? Am I coming in, or am I freezing on you?
No, you're good.
I'm probably freezing on my screen because my iPhone's low on battery. So that's what I do. Actually, where was I at today? Oh, today I did a home visit with a visiting nurse for physical therapy and a patient who had a procedure, and they needed to have their implement that they had taken care of changed. So that's where I was at today.
I know you don't like to. I know you don't like to typically do worship services, but I know that you do have a worship service that you do enjoy doing. You want to tell them about that one?
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, I work. There's deaf people in prison too, just like there's hearing people in prison. So I work at the prison with deaf folks who are in state prison. I interpret their group meetings that are mandated groups that they go to, as well as the Sunday morning church. I interpret in there. So I enjoy that. And my perspective on corrections has changed since working in corrections. I used to have the philosophy of, you did something bad, go away, spend your time. However, my philosophy has changed on that some people make bad mistakes. Yeah, so I could go off on that, but it's interesting being now as they're releasing folks out of prison, they're saying, oh, it's only the low-level crimes that they're letting out, but it's many people who work in corrections. The low-level crimes are some of the younger folks, and some younger folks don't have respect for authority or respect for community, whereas some of the older folks that have been in for 20 years would be more likely to get out, even though they might have killed somebody or done something like that. So that's off of interpreting. But yeah, I like that. I work with deaf and hearing interpreters. It sounds crazy that you have a deaf interpreter, but and maybe, I don't know, North Carolina, I haven't seen many of your press conferences. I'm not sure where Beth is from, if you're from North Carolina or what state you're from. And who else is there? And Gracie, what states are you guys from?
Everyone's North Carolina.
North Carolina, okay. So I haven't seen your press conferences of what your state is doing. But we, in Philadelphia area, we have interpreters who are deaf, which means they're a deaf person who they have not traditionally so far gone to an interpreter training program, college like I have, but they've learned how to take training in the process of interpreting. So when there's a press conference, there's a person who's hearing interpreter sitting out watching the speaker, and they're signing whatever the speaker says, and the deaf interpreter is watching the hearing interpreter interpret it, and the deaf interpreter takes it and turns it into American Sign Language a little bit more. So it's really interesting to watch, because some people are like, why are they so far behind? Or why are they so expressive? Because they're like making all the motions, because they're doing what us hearing people can't do, because we're not native users of the language. So it's been interesting watching that. And that we have, in the Philadelphia area, we're very fortunate. We have about 5 or 6 interpreters who are deaf and who have been certified in that, who've taken their test and passed it. So it's pretty neat. I love working with my deaf interpreters, especially working in mental health, sometimes medical and corrections. Whenever we have a parole hearing, I work with deaf and hearing teams. So that's a lot about deaf hearing teams. It's pretty cool to watch. What else about interpreting? Do you have any questions so far?
Have you ever worked with a deaf blind?
Yes. Oh, good point. Let me actually, speaking of blind, you're going to be blind if I don't plug in my phone. I'm at 17%. So if you just give me a moment,
Yeah,
I'm going to get
thing.
my phone charger. Just a moment.
So you guys are thinking about
He's gone.
Right? And he'll tell us about schooling and all that stuff too. Brian's been to school a few times.
I haven't been to school in a while because of the Rona.
Yeah. Well, Brian has actually had to work more because of the Rona because he's had to go into places that to prisons and to hospitals and there's all the interpreters. Some interpreters don't want to do that. So Brian has to go in with the all masked up and.
Yeah, he got his masks.
Yeah, that's right. Did he get it? I didn't ask him about that.
I mean,
people love your masks wherever I go, people ask me who made my mask.
That's awesome. I'm definitely gonna make more, but we're in the middle of moving right now, so like the majority of stuff is packed up. But I have a ton of fabric that I found, and yeah.
He's back.
So Brian, can you just tell us a little bit about how the coronavirus has affected your job?
Yeah. Let me see, when did it start? Probably back in Pennsylvania. Our county here in Pennsylvania, I'm in as our state Department of Health calls it, a collar county of Philadelphia. It's the counties surrounding Philadelphia. There's 5 of them. Actually 4 plus Philadelphia County. And the first time I got a call from the agency, I think it was on a Friday night, because everything fun happens on Friday nights for interpreting, and it goes through the weekend. And they said, we have a patient who's in the hospital who might be confirmed. They're not sure if they have coronavirus or not, but would you be willing to go interpret? And I'm like, okay, because as a healthcare interpreter, I really consider my job, I really enjoy healthcare interpreting. That's my specialty. And so I knew that you take PPE and precautions when you go into a setting. So this patient, they had done the test, but the test results weren't back yet. So we wore the plastic blue, I call them trash bags. You put on, and then you put on your gloves, of course. And a lot of people don't know how to put on gloves the right way and take them off the right way. That's one of my pet peeves, seeing people in the grocery store shop, and it's like you got a glove on one hand and no glove on the other, and you're looking at the stuff in Staples. I was looking for a webcam, and you're looking at the stuff, but you got your N95 mask plus another mask over top that. Maybe you have respiratory issues. I'm not busting on that, but just universal precautions, and it's so important working in healthcare. Even though I'm not I consider myself a healthcare professional because I work in hospitals and whatever. So we take the same precautions as nurses and doctors do. Some other interpreters who don't specialize in healthcare, like one called me and said, well, what do we do? I was called to the emergency room and I don't have an N95 mask. And I'm like, because you're working with a patient that's not positive, they've just taken the test, you can wear a surgical mask. You can wear a surgical mask, which are the ones you throw away. Yeah, so I go on about that, but yeah, we take the PPE like they have, and I've been fortunate. I actually have the one that Nia made me. Thank you. I used that. That was one of my first, because I wanted to be prepared and backed up to go in. But so that was my first patient that I guess I call going into the war zone or whatever. But we usually, when we're in hospitals with an inpatient, somebody who's there for a few days, interpreters, sign language interpreters, tend to sit in the hall outside of the patient's room. And then whenever the healthcare professionals or whoever go in, we go with them and interpret it. With coronavirus that I've experienced with that patient, and then there's been some others, if it's a true confirmed positive, they might send me into the room, we might go into the room, but they try to do it through a window. And some rooms have what's called high pressure rooms, which is the pressure's taken out of it. So you have a place where you go in and gown up and you go into the room. But that one had it, but I didn't have to use it. So that's with that patient. I work with another patient on a COVID positive floor, or a rule up. They call them rule out floors, which is if you are in the hospital or go to the hospital and have symptoms consistent with COVID, then they'll give you a COVID test. And it might take, at that time, it was taking 4 or 5 days to come back. So they would put you on a COVID rule out floor, which everybody there has had the test, but they don't know if they're positive or negative. And all the room doors are closed. And I'd still sat in the hallway at this place. But you go in as a group, like the nurse and the nurse's aide. And when it's time to give medication, you go into medication, you go in to do everything sort of in a group. So the second patient I was with, let me see, how do we start out? I think, yes, when I got on the case, the patient was in the ICU because they had some symptoms consistent with COVID, but they weren't sure. So they put them in they moved them out of the ICU to a rule out floor. And then from the rule out floor, they went back to a regular floor a couple of days later. And some of the hospitals are all COVID positive hospitals, meaning anybody this is in the Philadelphia region, anybody who has COVID goes to a COVID hospital, because that's all they treat there. And then those that aren't COVID, like this was right beside a cancer center hospital. So those that aren't COVID, they were sending over the cancer center.
So is this affecting, like, there are some interpreters, I'm sure, who don't want to go into these situations. And you told me that you felt that it was your responsibility to the deaf community.
Yeah, I saw a post. I wish I would have saved it, and I could probably go back and archive it. And it was when this first came out. Was from our Facebook group from Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, who's our national body. And it basically laid out, deaf people, this is their communication and language. And if everybody runs away, we are, now my battery's going low on my computer, which I have my cord right here, just a moment. I'm so old school. Well, this is
I
because I
have
live
to
out
keep
of,
mine has to be plugged in all the time. The battery
well,
doesn't
I
work.
live out of my car. See, I just took it out of my backpack because I was at the job and I didn't know if I'd be sitting in a parking lot waiting for the home nurse to come or not. Just a minute. I gotta do it the other way. Okay. Yeah, now I'm back. So, that's the first patient. After that, I went to that first patient. And because of that, I figure, I know that it's like the Lord's blessing, because I'm not afraid to go into those environments. I know I take precautions, but other interpreters are like, oh, ooh, they go in like freaked out. I'm like, well, doctors and nurses aren't freaked. That's what they do in the healthcare. They're not freaked out when they go in. They just got to be calm, know what you're going to go in to do. And the truth for me is I'm single. I don't have any kids. If I get it, I get it. I mean, it sounds crazy, but if I die, I die. But it's not, I say it simply, but I take my temperature each morning and each night at home. Here I have a log. So if I ever have consistent symptoms with that, then I can go to the hospital. I know that. For those patients who are deaf or hard of hearing, our Office of Deaf and Hard of Hearing has made up it's an 8.5 by 11 sheet that says, my name is such and such. My pain level is, it has number 1 to 10 and they circle what it is. I do have a living will. I don't have a living will. My living will is wherever, and it says my next of kin or my contact information is this. So that if somebody does have to go to the hospital and the hospital it's crazy or whatever, they can at least give that to the nurse, and the nurses can identify who they are. I mean, they'll have that in their health record, but it just gives some way to communicate. I applaud the healthcare system that I worked at, because some healthcare systems across the country have said, you know what, we have COVID, we're not going to bring in interpreters at all. And so they've relied on technology, video relay interpreters, which is a interpreter through the computer. The only thing with that is sometimes the Wi-Fi in hospitals is not good. I was just called to the hospital Sunday morning for a patient who goes to this same hospital a lot and has sickle cell. And they were having such pain. And the nurses knew the patient, but they didn't know where the pain was at and what was going on. So they tried to use the video interpreter first. They called up the number on this little iPad that's on this mic stand. And they said, well, we're really busy. We can call you back, but we can't get to you right now. And the nurse is like, well, that's not an option. So they called our agency, which we service that hospital system. And I went in and was there for about 2 hours just to get everything straightened out. And then I left. What else about COVID? Yes.
Well, let's actually save some of that, because I don't want to run out of time without us
Right.
talking
That's
about
right.
some of the other things. So first of all, I've asked the kids, this class, to, if they had questions, I'd like them to ask questions first. I have a million questions I could lead with, but let's hear what they have to say. So raise your hand if you have a question for Brian. Nia.
Nia. Oh, okay. Sorry, Gracie, you were covered by my cell phone. Let's start out with Gracie.
Okay. This is very different from COVID, that's for sure. But how, I know some interpreters interpret music very differently. How do you like to interpret music?
I see Denise is smiling on this one.
He's really good at rap music.
I interpreted creation with music previously. I can interpret music. I don't consider myself a theatrical interpreter. Some people love music, and with interpreting, there's 2 types of interpreting. Those that really interpret the music, and then those that sign the music with the English words. There's 2 really great interpreters, more than that, but who really do music really well. The one, she was on America's Got Talent or something. She has pink hair. You might have seen her.
Yeah.
And she was on Facebook. But I'll do music. I really don't like church music, worship music, because it's the same words over and over and over. And how can you change this to
You see,
so
I love it because people can learn the vocabulary because the words are over and over.
This is true. This is true. You can learn vocabulary. So music, I can do music. Interpreting. There's actually a group here in Philadelphia. Hands Up Production. They actually interpret theater. So there's three of them that run it, but they have other interpreters, and they have a deaf interpreter that is the language model. So they really work through the script and interpret the plays. Yeah, so I haven't done any theatrical interpreting. Church interpreting I've done. And church interpreting can be tiring in the fact of you're there for the most. In the ultimate world, you would have two interpreters and switch off every 20 minutes. And that's something that's sort of standard practice as of now. But with our changes with this virus and how we go to video interpreting, that might change. Because after 20 minutes, your processing is not at the same level and you're not the same amount of accuracy. So in college classes, we use two interpreters most of the time. So that's about music. So does that answer your question?
That's perfect. Thank you.
But sometime you have to see him do rap music because he's really good.
I wish I had a video of myself doing it, but yeah. Now I'm learning, working in the prison, I'm learning some new terms that I didn't know before, like grinds you up, grinds you up. And look, he's just trying to spin me. And these are things that there's really not a sign for, but you just got to give it, and what it means.
Typically, didn't you say that typically in Philadelphia, most of your church services, most of your inmates are Black inmates, right? Is that correct?
Oh, of the inmates? Well,
yes, and therefore they take their culture, their church culture is reflective of their Black culture.
Are you speaking of the church attendees in general?
Right.
Okay, yeah, the church attendees in general. Yeah, of our church group, church Sunday morning services, probably about 90 to 95 is African American, Black, and the other 5% are white.
Which
but
is
a lot of
horrible, but by the way, but
right.
But the culture-wise, in America, there's definitely different cultures between
right and
typically Black churches and white churches.
Our worship team, it's not like these people from outside come in and do it. These guys got talent. They got all of our worship team is, which usually about six. They got the drum. They got two sets of drums, two guitars, and two keyboards, and 6 singers. But a lot of the songs are songs that they had when they were growing up kids in African American church. We sing some newer songs too. So yeah, but of the deaf guys that attend, there's only 2 deaf guys that attend church right now. The other one attends the Catholic Mass on Saturday night. There's 1 Black and 1 white. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Nia,
question?
you had a question?
Yeah. What's one common mistake that you see new signers and even new interpreters make?
Well, it's that's interesting you say that, signers versus interpreters, because I don't lump them together, but sometimes I do lump them together. New signers, oftentimes, I don't know if it was you, Denise, that asked me about signing. New signers want to tend to put their hands back, oh, you're on my camera.
Like you're talking to yourself.
Like A, B, C. No, it's A, B, C. So your palm is facing out. So that's with new signers. So you don't sign to yourself, you're signing to the person out there. So that's the main thing with newer signers. As far as newer interpreters, I've mentored many newer interpreters. I don't really mentor new interpreters that much anymore because we have 2 programs here. One is a 4-year program and one is a 2-year program. And the 2-year program is not enough for the interpreters to have, the interpreting students to have enough experience if they're not immersed within the deaf culture or interacting with deaf people. So newer interpreters, I would say they're negative is, or thing they can improve upon is their processing time, or it's called lag time. From what I'm saying now, being like 8 or 9 words or a sentence behind me and not staying right up on top of the speaker. Because if you're right on top of the speaker, you're gonna miss, they could just change it up on you, and you're going down this road and thinking, okay, yes, 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 they're saying something negative, 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 and then they go positive, and you're like, oh, I just did all of this up to here talking about something negative, but they're talking about the positive light of this. So that's what I would say for both signers and interpreters who are new.
And that's one thing that I have to say is that for me, whenever I've done interpreting, I don't know how to lag behind. I really don't. I am right on top of the word because I have lots of vocabulary and I can usually keep up with words, you know, with that. And if I have to lag behind, I'm not involved enough in the process to I feel like I'm going to fall back and fall back and fall back and just totally lose them.
Right, totally. And that's a learned process too, as you interpret more and learn. They used to call it lag time, now it's called processing time. So lag sounds like you're just not doing it, but it's processing time. Even in doctor's office, I'm trying to now, since I've been doing it long enough, there's a test in Texas, which is medical certification test. And when you go into this test, if you even keep right up with the doctor, you're going to fail it. They want you to listen, do like other languages do, consecutive versus simultaneous interpreting. And I tend to do simultaneous, meaning the speaker's talking, I'm signing at the same time, which you can do in sign language, but you can't do in spoken languages, because otherwise you'll be talking over each other. But spoken languages tend to listen to the language, wait and wait and wait, and then give out what they just said. And we as interpreters, sign language interpreters, are moving towards that a little bit, especially in doctor's offices.
Can you tell us, like, first of all, I think I want to ask something. I want to change my idea here. You've done a lot of education. From the point of view of a deaf child or a deaf teenager, how do you see that being deaf affects them and how they relate to their peers and how peers relate to them?
Well, I think that's a good question. First of all, I think it's very crucial. Language access, having access to language and communication. Only about, I have to check this statistic again, but I think only about 10% of deaf children who are deaf who have hearing parents, only 10% of their parents sign fluently.
That is so sad.
So
did you get what he
because
said?
of that.
Do you guys understand what he just said? That only 10%.
Okay, so you're shaking head. Meaning, I was born deaf. I can't hear. I go to school to learn. When I go to school in kindergarten or whatever, I learn sign language. And in school, I use sign language with my friends. But when I get home, my parents, they gesture to me, or they might use a little bit of sign language, but we really can't have a conversation in depth about anything because they don't sign well enough. So my support structure and the people who I communicate with are all my friends from school or my interpreters or the deaf community, because I can't really have a deep conversation with my parents. So because of that, what was your specific question, Denise? It was, how do they relate?
How do peers, well, so let's say hearing peers, how would a hearing peer relate to a deaf child? And how does that affect them in the way that they are able to function in society?
Yeah, a hearing peer, I mean, having the ability to sign and be a friend and have somebody that has the same shared language and using that is a big thing. It opens up a deaf person's world a lot. And being respectful when you're around a deaf peer or a deaf individual, signing when you're around them, not like, oh, they're here, so let me sign, but having the understanding that, oh, a deaf person's here, a deaf person is attending this event, so even though there's no deaf people right here beside me, I'm going to sign so it's accessible to that person if they want to join into my conversation or see what's happening. I think I've seen students, well, this student that I'm speaking of is like now in their mid-20s, maybe 30s now, the parents never accepted that their child was deaf, really. They always sort of felt a little bit of depression. Well, I can't think of the word, like denial that their child was deaf. So they never really let the child develop who they were. Like, I want to use sign language. This is who I am. I'm not hearing like you wanted me to be when I was born. I'm not hard of hearing. I'm sort of hard of hearing. But letting that child determine their own, it's a new term that's coming out called deafhood, meaning I accept who I am. I'm deaf, I accept it. Whether I use sign language as my majority of communication or use spoken language with sign language as support, I accept who I am. Because many people who are deaf or hard of hearing or lose their hearing later on in their teenage years or later, they don't know where they fit in because they weren't born deaf. They didn't know sign language. Then they lost their hearing or got hard of hearing and have hearing aids, but they miss out on everything people are saying around them. So where do I fit in? Which world am I in? So I think it's so important to have a friend or whatever, just let them be in part of your world, but whatever type of communication they use, communication is communication. That's important.
And we only have a few minutes left, so before, I have one more thing, but I want to see if anybody else has something. Go ahead.
Beth has a question.
I'm trying to learn because I manage motels. And I'm just curious, how hard is it for the deaf to be traveling out of state, out of country, in different areas? And what is there for them?
That's interesting. I know some hotels, for example, communication devices, or one thing is fire alarms, which you're probably aware of, smoke alarms like visual alerts, which most hotels now, because ADA has the visual strobe light alert. Another thing when deaf people come to your hotel or wherever would be a door knocker, and it comes in a kit that you can buy. There's many different people that make it. So it's sort of magnetic, most of them that go in the back of the door. So when there's a knock on the door, it's a visual strobe alert. Some motels, most newer ones at least, have 2 or 3 disabled rooms where it has a button, like a doorbell, that you push and it'll be a visual strobe light in the room. They used to have, which is sort of an archaic technology, TTYs, teletypewriters is what they were called. But it was
Old
where
school.
you would,
Yes.
old school. We don't have those anymore. Some people say, oh, we have a TDD or TTY. Well, that's so old school because now they use, it's sort of like smart time, but it's through a video relay service where the FCC funds it. And I would call up, I have my own phone number on my cell phone. I want to call a hearing person. It goes through the relay center. There's a live interpreter there, picture like we're doing now, interpreting my conversation for me. So they really don't give us. I know some hospitals now, because they can't use the phones at the bedside, will actually give a laptop, like an iPad, with video relay service downloaded. But that's the main thing, door knockers.
At my place, I have 3 places and not one of them has any of that.
There's a company called Sign Enhancers, Sign Enhancers. And there's also a place called Harris Communications. Harris Communications is out of Eden Prairie, Minnesota. And they have a lot of deaf products and things like that. Another thing is the bed alarms. I forgot about that. They have, instead of an alarm clock, it's a bed shaker. So it's a big round, usually a round disc that vibrates, that hooks into, like you said, at whatever time you want to get up, you put it under your pillow and your pillow vibrates. So that's another thing. So those are the two main that are current technologies for deaf or hard of hearing. I can get that information to Denise.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, Harris, and I have the catalog for the other company.
Okay, anybody else have a question? Nico?
Nico?
Have you ever interpret for legal stuff, like at press conferences, governors, like
Good
that?
question. Legal as in court, no. because in Pennsylvania, you have, well, now in all the states, you need to be on the approved list and have to go to this 2-day training. And I don't want to be in court because I change up stuff too much. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Let me just, I don't admit stuff, but it's very illegal. But as far as press conferences, no, I've never stepped up to that level yet. That's something maybe in the future. I haven't done conference interpreting either, which is where you're on a stage and people look at you. Graduations, I've done that. So yeah, I haven't done that. That's a whole specialty. Because if you in court, if you stand at the wrong place and the judge says, excuse me, you need to move, you're like, well, I got to stand here to see so that people can see me. That's totally out of line in the courtroom. You say, you always address them by Your Honor, may I move from this position to another one? He's the one in charge of the room. You're not, even though you're the interpreter. You're not
So that's what I should have said to the Secret Servants, the Secret Service guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excuse me, may I move from this location to this
I
one?
didn't say that. I said,
Right.
I'm sitting over here.
The difference, well, that's the difference between a signer and like Nia's question, a signer and a beginning interpreter.
and he says, ma'am, the president's coming through. You've got to move. I said, he's deaf. He's not gonna. Yeah.
And that goes back to Nico's question. It takes a different type of interpreter. Like we have interpreters for our county press conferences, and just what you do and where you stand, and the camera's not on me. Like they're not seeing like how you approach that and your decorum.
Yeah.
Would you say that your preference is more one-on-one and the personal?
Yeah, most of my interpreting works one-on-one. Sometimes I get to a job and I'll have like 2 or 3 deaf clients. Like for example, at UPS, and they hired 3 deaf people, and they're all having training together. It's a warehouse facility. Well, 3, but most of my jobs are one-on-one.
But it sounds like you prefer that to the mass.
Oh, instead of like mass, because when you're videotaped, like if it goes out on TV, you make a mistake, anybody could see it, and you record, and it's like, did you see that interpreter? And then they look for your face out on Facebook. We do that. We stalk, and like, who was that interpreter? Well, I don't know them. Or like other states, like Florida had one that got called out. Like she was, was it Florida? No,
Yeah, I think so.
Florida. But she was not ready for that level of interpreting work. It's like, no, you just don't do that.
Right.
So
There are so many times you've seen where like the guy's brother was deaf, so they asked him to sign something, and he was like, he shouldn't have been. They never should have put him in that position.
Not that level of interpreting.
Right. And he wasn't an interpreter. This guy was a brother of a deaf person. There's signing and there's interpreting is 2 different things.
And then that's one thing where Pennsylvania has a state law that says that, you have to be certified to work as a sign, take the test in that. Other states don't. So in Florida is one of the worst states. Their quality of interpretation is lower.
Okay, so I'm we have 4 minutes left.
Go ahead.
I want you to give us a 2-minute what it took to become an interpreter and what made you make that choice to be an interpreter. You have 2 minutes.
Right. I don't have my timer on there, but I thought I wanted to be a private pilot, like in small little Cessna planes flying around in jungle countries and stuff. So I was taking flying lessons, had a bad experience, and I was taking a community sign language class with my mother, and the teacher was deaf, and she said, have you thought about becoming an interpreter? And I said, no, I haven't. She said, well, we need more males here in Pennsylvania, and why don't you think about doing it? So I went and visited a college up near where I grew up who had at that time, an associate's 2-year program. Did that. Now most colleges are a 4-year program. And from that, I had an interview in a school for a county board of education to interpret. And that's what led me to be an interpreter.
All right, so now I'm just going to pick up this random book.
Okay, go ahead.
And I'm going to read it, and you're going to show them what it looks like.
All right.
To them.
Now, this is my 2nd time. Actually, my first video interpreting job was last week, where I actually sat at home with my computer and interpreted.
Okay, well, we are reading from Fit Kids, Smarter Kids by Jeff Galloway. I hope you interpreted that. Okay. Eating too much too soon before you run. Your system has to work hard running. and works hard to digest food. Doing both at the same time raises stress and results in nausea, etc. Having food in your stomach in the process of being digested is an extra stress and a likely target for elimination. And who knows what that means?
Yes, now that's a question too, because I was working recently. I know we got like 30 seconds.
We got 2 minutes, we're good.
Okay, I was working with a deaf interpreter, and the client kept using that word like it was in a medical setting, or actually today actually, the client had a procedure, a colostomy bag, which is where the bowels come out and everything. I don't want to make people sick, but they're like to the nurse, yeah, I shit, and they use the sign shit, and on their voice and their mouth it says shit, but I sort of like didn't say shit. I said, oh, I had a bowel movement, but it was like running, because you have to know how a bowel movement is to see if you need to take more laxatives or whatever to pass through your system. So I sort of glossed over. I shouldn't have, but I'm like, well, yeah, and then I throw the word shit in every other time. And I said to the nurse, I use the word bowel movement, but he's using the word shit, but I'm just gonna use the word bowel movement from now on. And I said, and culturally, it's okay to use the word shit because that's what it is. And so, yeah.
Right. Or elimination. Yeah.
Or elimination. It depends how it eliminates.
And it depends. And if it's like, you have to worry about it.
It depends.
But again, that's a cultural thing too. Like, and also, last question. Would you say that generally, this was the case when I was actually like going to school, and maybe it's changed. I hope it's changed. But generally speaking, in the United States, the deaf population has a lower level of education than the hearing population, and their reading skills are generally lagging behind the hearing population. Is that still true?
Yes, the reading skills are behind because it's all about language development. When you're 2 or 3 years old, when you're younger, that's such a critical window to learn language and be exposed to it. And usually it's like a 6th to 6th grade level for most deaf or hard of hearing individuals. It's higher, it could be higher than that. Doesn't mean that they're illiterate, but the reading level of English is a little bit lower. So that's why medical forms I try to explain more.
Well, and also if you think about it, if you, just like you just said, for the first 5 years, the parents are not signing.
Right.
The first 5 years are when we develop language.
Right.
And if the parents are not communicating language skills to them, they are going to be that far behind.
Yeah.
And it'll be really hard to catch up. Okay, I am going to end this meeting, and thank you, Brian. This will hopefully figure out how to put this onto our class. If you have more questions, we can invite Brian back. We will be a little bit more like today's class, we did a 20-minute version, but I did a recap on the page, so we're good. But if other questions about your education, about, the profitability of it, is it something, that
you could make a living. Like my mother always said, well, why are you going interpreting? You're never going to make money. But being a male, if you're a male, and Nico, I'm just talking to you right now, but if you're a male and you're African-American,
oh,
I'm just calling it out like it is. We need some Black interpreters. So
excuse me, he's Haitian. He's Haitian American.
I'm sorry, but look, that's even better yet, because see, we don't have to call a Haitian interpreter. We can double scoop there. We can have the Haitian and the sign language, and you're good. Just like the Spanish and the American.
No, he's
sign
not.
language.
He doesn't speak Creole anymore.
All right. Well, I tried, but he can become an interpreter. I'm sorry. And well, Josiah could too, but sorry.
But well, hey, you know what? That's good to know, isn't it? I mean, really, in reality, it shouldn't be that way, but in reality, it is that way.
There's more demand for male interpreters. I'm in the urologist's office once a week.
Urologist deals with peeing and stuff, guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like you got a large prostate. That's what I deal with. Do you have
I don't know what prostate is. So.
Look it up.
Look it up. And as I told you before, Brian has also done heart transplants. So very interesting stuff. That's another week. We'll have you back again, and we thank
Okay.
you for coming, Brian.
All right.
I'm
Thanks
gonna
for
end the
the
meeting.
invite.
All
Yeah, me
right.
too. Okay.
See you later.
All right. I'm leaving. Oh, there it is.
Um,
I'm trying to leave.